The Perfumer, a fiction. Sometime in the early years of the 20th century, a mysterious figure began appearing around the approaches and entryways to major railway stations in London and Paris. He was conspicuous because he was a foreigner, a Persian, and he stood out from Europeans. He was late middle-aged, slightly portly in frame, but reportedly handsome, with a round, bearded face and a wide, warm smile. His business at the railway stations was selling perfumes. He had a small trestle table and an extensive supply of exotic oils and fragrances in small vials that he would sell singly or blend for his customers. Many vendors assembled at the approaches to the railway stations, hoping to sell their wares to morning commuters. They would begin to set up their stalls from around 5 a.m. every morning, except Sundays. This Persian man would set up his stall among them and was accepted by the other stall holders, principally because the exotic items he was selling did not offer competition to anyone else. He also became popular among commuters who were intrigued by his unusual and sensual fragrances. No one else in London or Paris sold such oriental delights at such affordable prices. Gentlemen on their way to the office would buy perfumes from him as a special gift for their wives or mistresses. He came to be known just as the Perfumer, and he plied his wares outside railway stations for a period of at least 10 years before, after, and even during World War I. Descriptions of him are scarce, except for one written account, a recollection written for Morton's Railway Gazette decades later, that present him as a storyteller and a sort of mesmerizer. He didn't tell fortunes, but he did give advice on matters of love and was known for his enthralling tales and aphorisms. Every perfume had a story. If you purchased a perfume from him, he also supplied some mystical account of its origins or made some claim about its supernatural powers. Often, according to the surviving written report, small crowds would gather around to hear his stories or to watch him bedazzle people with tricks and conjurations. The account relates an occasion where the perfumer shocked an assembled audience by correctly divining that a customer, a certain lady, had a mole on her left shoulder blade. How could he possibly know? The lady regarded it as improper. On another occasion, he told the gentleman about his former lives, and then amazed him by describing some very private details of the man's dream life. As a perfumer, love, romance, and the erotic were his domain. He catered to the love-lorn and to those intent on seduction. To repressed, late Victorian society, this made him a fascinating figure. There is no account that tells us the name of this perfume vendor who kept a stall outside railway stations, but for other reasons it is believed that he is the same man as a certain Lucian Shamsiri, a perfumer who was known in some aristocratic and high society circles in that same period. It is known that this Lucian Shamsiri, sometimes Shemsiri, was born in Persia, possibly of Baha'i or more likely Zoroastrian background, and seems to have arrived in Europe in the mid-1890s or thereabouts. He lived first in Russia, arriving from Istanbul, then Paris and London, and principally Paris. In those circles, too, he became known just as the Perfumer, and was a popular figure both for his exotic wares and for his stories and maxims. It is very unlikely that there are two characters of the same description in the same cities in the same period, so it is tolerably certain that the vendor at the railway stations was indeed Lucian Shamsiri. When he was not mixing with the nobility and nouveau riche, he was plying his trade to the general public. In both contexts, he presented himself as having been trained in the ancient and oriental traditions of perfumery, and as a keeper of mystical and magical perfumery secrets. Europeans in that age were fascinated by the Orient, as well as by the occult and the esoteric. Shamsiri, as a Persian, could invoke a pedigree that went back to the Magi themselves. His name is principally associated with that of the famous French perfumer, eroticist and proto-fascist Francois Coty, apparently through Coty's son Roland. He has also sometimes been connected to aristocratic and czarist circles in pre-revolution Russia, and even to the politics of the plot to assassinate Rasputin through Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, the lover of Coco Chanel. We know of him in these contexts, however, mainly through his associates, while he himself remains a shadowy figure about whom we know little for sure. He was connected, it seems, to two Jewish figures, a man and a woman named Abraham Drembritsa and Hannah Barsky. These two were colourful characters who were known to be involved in the black market that prospered throughout the period of the First World War. Their antics brought them to the attention of the authorities, even more so since they were Jewish, and this was the period that saw the inception of Nazism in Europe. Amongst other things, they were traders in rare and often illicit Oriental ingredients used in perfumery, such ingredients becoming exceedingly rare and expensive during the war. It seems they met Shamsiri in Paris during the years of scarcity, along with the self-styled Italian aristocrats, the Count and Contessa Calipari. It is possible that Hannah Barsky worked as a prostitute, or at least served as a connection between the perfumer and various madams in Paris at that time. Her name is also connected to a certain Maria de Naglaska, an early surrealist artist, a resident in Paris, and an exponent of so-called sexual magic. The nature of the case means that there is no trail of explicit documents that verify any of these connections. We depend upon surmise. These are underworld connections in wartime. Nevertheless, there seems to have been a distinct network of people, or a circle, occupied with some combination of perfumery, the occult, and the erotic arts. And although Drembritsa and Barsky are the names we encounter most, it seems that the perfumer, Lucien Shamsiri, was at the centre of this circle, if indeed he was not its leading figure, a sort of guru. In any case, it would not be inaccurate to describe the immediate group, Drembritsa, Barsky and the Caliparis, as followers or students or even disciples of Lucien Shamsiri, the perfumer. Although speculative, this much is fairly solid. What follows later becomes far more tenuous, and the figure of the perfumer becomes far more obscure. His stalls stopped appearing around railway stations, and there is no further account of him in that context from around 1923. Much later, his name, and those of his Paris associates, appears again connected to a mysterious event that is said to have occurred in northern Italy in 1926. According to a legend that took root at that time, a group of people, aristocrats and others, gathered at a remote villa near Trino, south of Milan, on New Year's Eve, but unaccountably they disappeared from the face of the earth, every one of them, in an event sometimes referred to as the Banquet of Trino. Whether such a meeting of people on New Year's Eve at a remote villa ever took place is itself questionable, but the legend was given flesh in 1947, that is, after the Second World War, by an Italian named Bartolo Casaro, who claimed in a book entitled The Banquet of Delights that a full account of the event with related material was handed down through his grandfather's estate. Indeed, he claimed that his grandfather, also named Bartolo Casaro, was among those who attended the banquet and who disappeared. In Casaro's account, the banquet was also attended by Lucien Shamsiri, who was named along with Drembritsa, Barsky and the Caliparis, the Count and Countess Calipari apparently being the connection between Paris and a villa in northern Italy. It is remarkable that Casaro knows this group of names, and even more remarkable that he connects them to this obscure legend, really just a type of local ghost story, through his grandfather. This is the point at which the perfumer really becomes a larger-than-life character. The basis for later amplifications is found in Casaro's description of him as a type of charismatic leader. Casaro's purposes are to advance a theory concerning his grandfather's disappearance. He claims that the occult activities of his grandfather were a poorly kept family secret, and that he came to know the full details of those activities and the true nature of a cult to which his grandfather had belonged. He provides summaries of written and tabulated information taken from family documents that he claims were in his possession. This includes a list with details of all those supposedly present at the villa in 1926, 121 names in all, and they were gathered, he says, under Shamsiri's leadership. But all those in attendance disappeared. The villa was found on New Year's Day completely empty, and the 121 were never seen again. He relates how some people, within his family perhaps, entertained the superstitious belief that through some ritual or other magical means, the attendees had been spirited to some higher dimension. In this account, the perfumer becomes a being with supernatural powers. Against this, Casaro has another explanation. There was a terrible truth behind the local legends, he says. He proposes that German nationalists had been tracking down 2 Jews who were ringleaders in this perverse cult. His theory is that the Italian fascists, in concert with the Germans, acted to eradicate these Jews and their cult with them. He believes that his grandfather and fellow guest at the villa were either bombed or, more likely, gassed, or else were taken to another place to be executed, and in this way were made to disappear without a trace. The 2 Jews he mentions are presumably Drembritza and Barsky. His grandfather was unfortunate to have belonged to a clandestine organisation, a secret society, a cult that was ruthlessly wiped out in one blow by the fascists. Other groups suffered a similar fate in that period. It should be admitted that northern Italy has a reputation for persistent underground forms of folk magic and the like, and it has been proposed that these events are underpinned by that subculture. Is this what became of the innocent perfume salesman often seen outside railway stations in London and Paris? Was there a much more extraordinary and perhaps much darker story behind the public persona? Did he have some sort of cult following? Did the perfumer disappear from public view in the 1920s due to some foul play connected with the legend of the so-called Banquet of Trino? As Casaro relates, certain superstitious beliefs persisted, and subsequently this formed the nucleus for an overgrowth of stories and speculations, no doubt most of them apocryphal. The upshot of them, though, was to elevate the perfumer into some manner of wizard or alchemist whose perfumes had powers of enchantment. According to some, he was a fakir on a mission to introduce a secret oriental cult into Europe. It was against this proliferation of speculation, in fact, that Ernest Trackworthy, his name was, wrote his sober recollections of the perfumer at London railway stations for Morton's Gazette. Not a wizard, just a jovial storyteller and prankster who often played upon Western stereotypes of the occult East. The furthest overgrowth of his reputation was in the form of a later figure, Clovis Dervishi, another Persian perfumer, an associate of Marguerite Maury, the pioneer of French aromatherapy. Davishi, it seems, at one stage claimed to be a reincarnation of Shamsiri, or to have some similar mystical connection, or at least attached himself to that name. He inflated Shamsiri with apocryphal stories for his own purposes, and conflated himself with Shamsiri. He was married to Nava Kami, or Nava Davishi, an artist who became a minor authority on the works of Gustav Klimt. They were minor figures in French occultism. Aside from these spurious exaggerations, however, the magical persona of the perfumer was significantly advanced by additional material that Casaro says had been preserved in his family. Most important was a manuscript of a long prose poem in English. It is mystico-erotic, a kaleidoscope of imagistic fragments. Oddly, Casaro makes no mention of it in his book and never explicitly connects it either to his grandfather or the perfumer or anyone else. It has been preserved without explanation. It includes some notes in an unknown language that appears, according to the few who have studied it, to perhaps be related to Persian. The work has subsequently come to be called The Bed of Purple, after an image from one of its verses, but it is in fact untitled. It was eventually investigated by the British Indian scholar Chandra, who was interested in its connections to the arcane traditions of Persian and Turkish love poetry. Chandra, who received the manuscript from Casaro at a much earlier date, has no doubt that the work is by or was made under the direction of Lucian Shamsiri. He more or less identifies Shamsiri as the author, although since the narrative voice throughout seems to be female, he admits that it's possible it was written by a woman under Shamsiri's direct tutelage or influence. Chandra regards the work as a type of pastiche of ecstatic poems familiar in the Persian tradition, albeit deeply unorthodox. He claims, without giving sources, that Lucian Shamsiri was born in southern Iran circa 1860, and that he had studied perfumery under a master in the city of Susa. His view of Shamsiri is hostile. He sees him as a rogue, a con man, and a pretender. Chandra's admission that the poem may have been written by a woman under Shamsiri's tutelage or influence was taken up and preferred by other writers. Contrary to Chandra, it was proposed and then accepted in the small circle to whom the poem has been available that Bed of Purple appears to be some type of automatic writing rather than a literary pastiche, and that it is very likely a work of, from, or connected to Hannah Barsky, possibly under Shamsiri's tutelage or influence. The manuscript is probably in her handwriting. All the same, it is no doubt within the orbit of the perfumer for all of these reasons, and so it is said to reflect and represent his supposed teachings, assuming him to be a teacher and not just a perfume salesman. This is a substantial leap. He's suddenly a teacher with a text.